Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
You too.
So you are running for legislative position 2 in District 3.
Correct.
What inspired you to run, and how's it going?
It's going really great, very positive. What inspired me to run was just actually, honestly, a lot of frustration. I was trying to really figure out what was going on when the Inslee did the mandate, and started doing a lot of research and looking at law and constitution, and just really felt like a lot of our rights were being taken away from us. And I started going to school boards and city council meetings and just wasn't really getting anywhere. And so I noticed that it really needed to be top down state, really needed to start at the state level. Always been a huge advocate for students, so I chose to take my advocacy to the state level.
And because you were a teacher for a long time, and
still technically am, but yes.
Yeah, and so there was a little controversy, I suppose you could say. Tell people a little bit about what you did and why you did it.
Yeah, so on November 23rd, I made a choice after a lot of reflection and a lot of prayer to advocate for my students. I chose to be courageous and stand against a policy that was more about politics than it was about medical science. And I also have to say, I was the teacher that was the expert. I was supposed to be helping students with their emotional health and with their social skills, and making sure that they were, regulating their behavior and well-rounded. So I kind of felt like I was the expert. They had hired me to be the expert on making sure our children were healthy emotionally. And I was watching them withdraw. I was watching them not even make eye contact with people around them or have conversations. And they would just put hoods up and have their masks on and just not even interact. And it was awful to watch. So I decided to, after, like I said, prayer and reflection, go to school one day without a mask on. So I had worn a mask for 2 school years, and I chose to take the mask off because I had exhausted my efforts to go to the school board, the superintendent, and just really trying to talk to people that our kids were being harmed, and nobody would listen. So I really thought that my act of taking the mask off would get people to sit at the table and have a discussion. It did not. It ended 5 months later in my termination. So it took 5 months for them to terminate me, and they terminated me on May 2nd. Which, Inslee lifted the mask mandate in March sometime.
And this is 2020 that you did this?
Yeah, November 23rd, 2021 is when I took my mask off.
2021, okay.
And then on March of 2022, somewhere in there, Inslee lifted the mask mandate. And then on May 2nd, 2022, the Spokane Public Schools fired me, terminated me.
Interesting. And so when you say it took them 5 months to fire you, were you working or were you suspended? Did they suspend you, or were you still going to school and working?
No, I was on administrative leave while they investigated me not wearing a mask. And I do want to point out that the one thing I said when I was asked by one person to put my mask on that day, by an administrator, I said, not today. This wasn't meant to be an anti-mask thing or even long-term. It was meant to bring awareness and advocate for students. And instead, it created my huge investigation is what they called it. Yeah. And then 2 months later, they brought me in and talked to me, but it was more like a 3-hour interrogation. I was treated like a complete criminal, and then still on administrative leave until they terminated me.
Yeah, so let's look at, let's go to your survey. So we're going to go into education here. So question 8 on the survey.
And just to finish that, just so you know, I go to Superior Court on July 22nd. I have not given up on getting my job back.
Okay. All right. Well, I wish you luck with that. And I think many people will wish you luck with that also. So question 8 on the survey, education. It is the fundamental right and responsibility of parents to direct the education of their children. The issue application A is critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and other like-minded programs are based on incorrect assertions and false narratives about our nation's history and culture. Additionally, critical theory, i.e. cultural Marxism, an ideology based on victim categories such as race, can be found as specific curricula, but it is also a worldview that influences many academic disciplines. The underlying assumptions of critical theory drive the formation of policies and initiatives in many government schools. And our response is that the above cited programs and ideologies should not be implemented in taxpayer-funded schools. And you responded to 10, strongly agree. And so we are seeing, so mask mandates is just one thing, but we're also seeing the categorization of children in schools. White kids are being told they're an oppressor and that they're evil, and then black kids, Latinos, Hispanics, Asians, and so on are being told that you're a victim and that this white person wants nothing more than to oppress you and to enslave you and so on. So what did you see in the school system when you were there? How did you see this impacting? And did you see any of this in your classroom? Did you see any of this impact in your school? How did that look?
I really only saw it in two realms. I think it's slowly coming over to this side of the state. You can definitely do your research on the west side and see a lot more examples. Where I saw it mostly was on teacher training. It was coming out pretty extensively. One class that the WEA put on in December of 2021 was called White Privilege. So that was a professional development for teachers to take. Even backing that up to the August of 2021, going into the school year, we had a training. I think it was considered an equity training, which is often the term now it's all about equity, which people can agree with, but then it gets pushed into this ideology of being an oppressor and a victim. So there was this training that an outside entity came in, and it's all on Zoom. And so you're kind of multitasking. So I have to be honest, I wasn't fully paying attention, but I definitely paid attention when they showed this thing called the flag salute. And it was somebody had written a poem and they put it next to the flag salute, but it was a story of a slave being murdered. If you ever look it up and read it, it's pretty sad. And of course, it's a sad time in history if we want to talk about slavery. But I do feel like we have made enormous gains. And I do feel like this country is a country that has allowed all oppressed people to find freedom. I think our forefathers were very... had a lot of foresight in that and knew that we would be this country that would be true freedom.
Right.
And so I feel like we need to keep focusing on that is what this country stands for, and not keep bringing up things that we can't change. We can just make sure today it isn't the same.
Right. We can honor it and we can say these things were bad, and everyone, no one I speak to says, oh, slavery was great. No one says that.
No, not at all. Then the second thing I saw was definitely there is this shift in discipline to where there are principals and administrators telling others that we cannot discipline based on color.
But you don't discipline it based on color anyway. You discipline based on action.
I do. I know you probably do as well. And so you actually are being told that you must take it into consideration because we don't want our numbers to look bad for minority groups.
Which in and of itself is racism.
Agreed.
So
I completely agree with
anytime
you.
that you give privilege to any one race over another, it's the definition of racism.
Yes.
And so, and I think one of the things that a lot of people don't recognize is that, Martin Luther King's dream was that little black children and little white children could hold hands walking down the street, and that we could have this cohesion in society of the racial groups. And we live that dream. I live that dream every day when I walk down the street with my wife. And so the fundamental reasoning behind this is some sort of reparation agenda that's we've known has been pushed for the last 6-7 years. The term kind of fell off, reparations. And it seems like it's kind of made its way into these types of programs where we're saying, oh no, equity and diversity and so on, and inclusion. And it's like, well, I don't really know what that means. And I think that we need to really define these words before we can really come to any consensus on whether they're good or bad. But I know that the application of these programs is not helping. I've heard stories I heard a story a few weeks ago of a little girl who went home and she was clearly troubled by something, and her mom asked what was wrong, and she asked her mom, am I evil? And her mom said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, well, because I'm white, I did bad things. And she's like, no, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. Right. And it's, where are we as a society when we're telling little children, 7, 8 years old, that just because of your skin color, you're evil or you're less than? That's exactly what happened during slavery. That's exactly why people like Martin Luther King died, was to free people from this ideology and this really projection of what you are based on race. And the sad truth is now we're regressing. You have, I think there's a school in Seattle now that has an all-black
graduation,
and they also have an all-black, what's the term?
Like a club?
Living quarters for the students. I forget what the technical
like a
term
dorm?
is. Dorm. There you go. There you go. That's the British in me. I couldn't think through it. So they have an all black dorm, and but it's the black students who are advocating for these things. And I kind of look at that and I go, did you not read or watch anything to do with the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and what he was truly advocating for?
Right.
You're regressing. But it's regression because they feel they have control.
Yeah.
But ultimately, no one has control, because we're just going to keep going in circles, and it's just going to create more divide, more tension.
Why is that needed? Why do we need to segregate populations when across all time we have tried to just create an American society where we can all have equal opportunity? And that's where I get into that big equity thing. Equity is often keeping everyone to the same standard, like you have to attain this, and they're not, versus equality, which allows same access, but you could go, way above that if you needed to.
Right.
And so I also want to be really, clear about some of the words that get used and what those actually mean, because a lot of times equity brings people down versus allowing them to have the same access, and then they could potentially flourish and go way beyond that.
Well, there's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome.
Yeah,
and
good way to say it.
Outcome is specifically based on merit, and opportunity is that everyone has equal opportunity, and then the outcome is based on your merit and based on performance.
I wish education would focus on that. We should be more focused on that versus just an outcome.
Right.
Because we almost limit sometimes that outcome if that's our focus.
Right, and not only do you limit it, but you also put people in positions that they ought not be because of their skin color, because of quotas, because of these things, and they're proven not to work. I mean, they have been proven time and time again not to work. I think oftentimes too, people forget that there were millions of white Union soldiers who died to free slaves and to abolish slavery in this country, and it was not because they were commanded to, is because they felt morally obligated to. I was just going to say,
their morality.
Yeah, and so they recognized in the Union that there was slavery, and that slavery was bad.
Yeah.
And the treatment of slaves were bad. And I often, when I get into these conversations, I say, well, what about the millions of white Union soldiers? You don't want to give them any recognition. You just want to cast every white person as being evil. Well, were they evil?
Right.
Were they doing wrong when they freed
just because of
your
their
ancestors
color?
from slave just because they're white? And this is something that you all obviously is close to your heart too, because you do have a biracial daughter too.
I do. All 3 of my children. Yes.
All 3. Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know that. I knew that your daughter was.
Yeah, we had 3 children. So,
okay.
And it definitely has concerned me, and I've watched it definitely affect my children, because a lot of these conversations show their mom, me, as the oppressor, and then their dad as the victim. And I guarantee he does not want to be seen as a victim. And that's a problem. And then I have my children that are 2 races. I call them my caramel babies. And what about them? So what do they have to pick a side? And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I just feel like we really need to focus on Americans. Amen. We're Americans first.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, my wife says, when people say, are you African American? She says, no, I'm an American.
Yes.
I've never been to Africa.
Dr. Elvita King, when she came over and spoke this year for the GOP, the Lincoln Day, she said the same thing. She goes, I'm so tired of hearing these Black American or Native American. We're just Americans. Yeah.
Well, natives, I think I would lend a little more leniency to in that
absolutely.
terminology. But yeah, African American, it's oftentimes it's just a way to box in who you are. But
I think that's my concern. I mean, if you want to, whatever you want to be called, that's fine. I'll respect that. But it's definitely just that piece of that boxing in. I just also want to be seen as.
But you can never be right then either, because I may go to one black person, I may say, you're African American, or black, or whatever, mulatto, whatever terms you want to, and I might say the wrong term to the wrong person, and they automatically offended. And we shouldn't be offended. We should just clarify and say, hey, it would be more respectful if you were to say this, right? So, and it's such a difficult thing, because then it's like, well, you're boxed in over here, you're boxed in over here, and then now you're trepid, and you're just like, well, I don't even want to engage because I might say the wrong thing, and that's a total regression of where we were going. And so this is something that is hopefully going to die down in the near future, because this is really dangerous for our kids.
And to get back to just education, maybe to finish up, we also need to remember that having discipline and consequences with love, it doesn't need to be punitive, but our children need boundaries. We need to create students that will be productive members of society. And taking discipline out of the equation, or making it based on race or minority or your poverty level, that's not how consequences and discipline should be.
No, and it doesn't help the children, and the masks don't help, because I know when I was a kid, I was very insecure, and I would put, my hat was like it was like my shelter. And so when you have these kids who feel that way, it's like, hey, if I just put this up, no one will know I exist. And then you couple that now covering half of their face, they're falling asleep in the back of the class, and they're like, oh no, I'm invisible almost.
Yeah.
And
that's what I was watching. It was awful.
Yeah, and we're trying to bring those kids forward and say, you don't need to be invisible. You can be who you are, and you can be successful.
Yeah. And here's something else to think about with a mask. When you have a teacher in a mask, we do a lot of teaching in our classrooms non-verbally, so that we can reach that kid in the back with, the mom look, what I always call the mom look, or a smile, or just that reassurance of being able to communicate. And when you take 2/3 of your face away, it really changes the dynamics in a classroom.
Yeah. You become a very good eye actress at that point, right? You're just,
and it doesn't work. Not effectively.
Yeah. So let's move on to question 12 on the survey, the poor and needy. The statement is that providing a safety net for the poor and needy is the responsibility of individuals, families, churches, and local communities. It is not the responsibility of the government, which primarily exists to protect citizens from foreign and domestic threats. Those who are able should be encouraged to work, because the satisfaction of the fruit of their labor, regardless of how minimal or mundane, is dignifying and life-giving. The issue application is that many metropolitan areas have a growing problem with homelessness, which is often connected to drug addiction and mental health issues. Local government officials should focus on protecting the safety of all citizens by enforcing regulations against public disturbance, trespassing, and loitering. The response is that government officials should leave the provisions of housing, rehabilitation, and other social services to individuals, families, and private organizations that are better equipped to directly help the homeless. Additionally, local officials should support law enforcement with proper funding, good faith negotiations, and responsible accountability. And you responded at 10. So there's quite a lot to unpack there, but I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now in Spokane County is the lawlessness. The crime rates are through the roof. We're in the top 10 in the nation, or even maybe top 5. I don't recall off the top of my head, but we're pretty high up there. Property crime is soaring. People don't feel safe in their own neighborhoods, in their own houses.
Drive-by shootings.
Yeah, and so what do you see as being a solution from a state level in order to try and fix some of these things?
Well, number one is we have to work on public safety, meaning we have to give the tools back to law enforcement so that they can do the job that they took an oath to do. And one of that is just being able to pursue criminals. That's number one, which was legislation that went through, so they're not allowed to pursue. And, criminals figure that out real fast. So, and it's skyrocketed that they just take off because they know the police cannot pursue them. And law enforcement took an oath to keep us safe. If they need to pursue a criminal, we should allow them to do that. I don't understand why we would handcuff that ability for them to do that. Another one is they decriminalize drug possession. And I just don't think that's humane. I have talked to enough recovering addicts. I've been down to Camp Hope. I've tried to really understand the issue, and I truly feel that it's not humane to allow people to sit in their addiction and or mental health crisis on the streets in filth with, not even access to a bathroom or a shower or, just the basic needs. I don't think that's humane.
No, and the big thing is that a lot of these laws are passed in the name of compassion. But when you get to the root of it and the heart of it, it's not compassionate, like you said, to let them essentially wallow in the echo chamber. If you're surrounding...
And I have a very humanitarian heart. I make sure people know that. I've done mission trips to Africa. I've done mission work through Serve Spokane here locally in our city. I very much want to help, but I want to help those willing to help themselves.
Right.
And sometimes they do need to be pushed a little bit. But again, I'll go back to it's just not humane to allow them to sit in that.
Right. It's just like you wouldn't put an alcoholic in a bar if they're recovering. It's just not the place for them. So if you're trying to rehabilitate drug addicts, putting them in a camp, they're surrounded by drug addicts and access to drugs.
And drug dealers that just drive up and drive through. And
that doesn't help.
No.
It
doesn't help our crime because often you need to steal in order to feed your habit. And so that's part of the issue with our crime right now.
Yeah, and a lot of it. And it also impacts the local community in that area. So. I saw I think it was KHQ or KXLY report where they went and talked to some of the residents and they said, I used to let my daughter play out in our little fenced yard. But now I don't feel that she's safe here. I can't let her play out in the yard.
Businesses have closed down and left. I can't think of exact names right off the top of my head, but I know that there have been businesses that have actually left because of this.
Yeah, and there were business owners downtown who were also talking about, hey, we might just need to move out of downtown Spokane, and then you're just giving it up. Yeah. And so there needs to be accountability, personal and individual accountability. And when the police are told, well, you have to have 2 contacts and then you can arrest, but we really don't want you to. So the prosecutors, the police can arrest them based on the 2 contacts, but then the prosecutor has pressure from the state legislature to say, hey, you can prosecute this, but we really don't want you to. And because the prosecutorial office is not a nonpartisan office, typically they're Republicans and Democrats, they can get funding for campaigns through either party.
Yeah.
So whichever party wants to push an agenda more can throw money at the issue and say, oh, well, we'll get you elected because we want you to do what we tell you to do from the state level, even though Spokane County isn't the state of Washington, it's Spokane County.
Right.
We need to be taking care of the people here locally first.
And those 2 contacts are citations, and it takes a police officer off the street for about an hour to hand that citation and then go do the paperwork for it. And that is really hard right now because they have so much going on and their priority is violence. There's a lot of violence in our city. And so they don't want to be off the street for an hour. That takes up to 3 contacts to actually have that person arrested.
So it's essentially discouraging them from even talking to them, engaging with them, or even trying to get them the help that they say they're trying to get them by giving them the flyers or citations or the material they're handing out. It's like...
And if we had comprehensive services and you came to that person and I've heard some things where we could rehab the jail and have it more of a triage center where you go in and then you either go to mental health services, rehab, or jail, but you have to have a consequence.
Right.
You get arrested and those are your 3 choices. And maybe if you sit in jail for a while, then you choose that you want rehab and then you actually get the comprehensive services that are needed.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone is against that. I was speaking to someone, I don't recall which candidate I was interviewing, but we talked about this. I think it might have been John Knowles, and we talked about how, if we're going to build a new jail, it needs to be comprehensive and it needs to be all in one building because...
I've sat in many meetings with him, so that was probably the right person.
Yeah, and so the big thing is, why can't we take someone to a jail that does have a wing for rehabilitation and so on. You're
And
still
mental health.
in mental health, and you're still in jail, but you're in a program that is designed to help you in the long run. And these need to be long-term programs, not
Correct.
90-day, 60-day programs that don't work. And there needs to be accountability. And if someone chooses not to go to one of the programs or chooses to decline mental health, then it's okay. Then you're going to live out your jail or prison sentence in the correct place.
Which needs to be more than 24 hours.
Yeah.
And that's something that has to be dealt with. But
yeah. And the big thing is, I hear a lot of people say, well, there's not enough help out there. People don't know, people don't know where to get help. Well, that's simply not true.
there's a lot out there.
I can guarantee you almost unequivocally 99.9% of the homeless people in Spokane, if you went to them and said, do you know what UGM is? They would say yes.
Salvation Army, yes.
Yes, they know exactly who these organizations are, what they are, and what they do. And the fact they aren't there tells you they don't want to be there. So if the only...
Because they have empty beds.
Right. And if the only other option is to be picked up for possession and to get time in jail for that unlawful possession, you need to be going to jail. It's that simple. And catch and release isn't working.
Right.
Like you said, 24-hour holds don't work. So how do we fix this though from a state level? That's the big question, because we do have these laws and policies on the books. How do you go in and say, hey guys, this isn't working? How do you break down the barriers of the pride from these legislations and say, guys, just admit you were wrong and let's really fix the issue?
I think it's starting there, just saying this isn't working. I mean, you can see that with every statistic. I mean, just walk around the city at this point and you can see it. So, and multiple cities, our entire state is in crisis right now between homelessness, crime. It's really bad. And so I definitely think it starts with that. We have to be able to acknowledge this isn't working. Your reform police bill has been a travesty. It is not working and it is creating the problem. So let's fix it. And I'm all for that. That's what I hope I can bring to the table when I get voted in, is that piece of let's fix it. Stop talking about what you wanted and what's there, and let's sit down and actually fix it.
Let's fix the issue instead of saying, oh, well, it would be nice if...
Let's fix it.
Yeah, well, yeah, it would be nice if we fix the problem.
Exactly.
Not if we're disguising compassion, how do I say this? Not if we're just disguising social and cultural issues in the name of compassion.
And to add to that, bring your experts to the table. Why? Well, I know there was many people that said that they voiced their opinion, so I think it was ignored. But if you're going to reform police, maybe you should have your chiefs and sheriffs as the experts sit down and look at that plan and give their opinion, because I know our chief and our sheriff clearly said it was not going to work, and everything they said that would happen is happening. Go to your experts. And that's another thing that I know I will bring to the table as a representative. I don't know everything, but I know how to research. I know how to ask questions. I know how to find the experts. And I also know how to look at something and think through those potential consequences, whether those are positive or negative. We have to think through those in these bills. That is often forgot. We're looking at this great, wonderful plan, and we don't have this conversation about consequences.
Right.
And again, consequences can be positive or negative, but what's going to be the outcome?
And I mean, every consequence cannot always be positive either.
True.
Because if we do that, then there's a disincentive to even follow through in the first place. And so you see this when we start talking about, well, if you commit murder, you'll only get 15 years now, or like a life sentence is now 15 years instead of actually a life sentence. Which has been that way in the UK for as long as I can remember. But to a career criminal, 15 years of time isn't a lot, especially when you get like a third off for good time.
Right.
And now you don't have to go in front of a parole board. Why shouldn't I gangbang? Why shouldn't I go and kill someone to take their possessions?
Well, and we're seeing this right now because of the huge, 3,000 people in jail were released based on Inslee's bill to have less people in jail. has to be part of the reason why our crime is skyrocketing.
And I think the stat was really low too in our state. It was like 0.8. I was talking to Larry Haskell, and he said that we have a really low prison population when you compare it to the overall population. So it was like 0.82% or something, very, very low. And I forget. Go watch Larry Haskell's interview if you want the specifics. He did give them, but it's very, very low in terms of the overall population, which means that what that means is that we are putting people in prison that deserve to be there, that they've broken the law and they've done bad things.
And our jail holds violent criminals. We don't have the capacity to be able to even hold misdemeanor crimes. Our jail is full of violent criminals.
Well, it's going to be a tough battle because there are people that have ideological goals in the legislature rather than realistic goals and realistic expectations. And
well, it's a good reason to vote for me because I would like to bring some common sense and just that, be a little bit more realistic as a true public servant over in Olympia.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think people ought to start thinking about is when you're voting for someone, look at the things they're saying. And then if you vote for that person and they go to Olympia or they go to Congress and they aren't doing the things that they promised and they're doing things in direct contradiction, and then they're not willing to come back to your constituency and say, hey, this is why I did what I did. There had to be a compromise, right? And so how do we get better about informing people about your voting record, for example? I've heard, well, people will criticize me for a voting record, but I voted this way for a reason. But then we never get to hear the reason.
Right.
So is there something that you have, is there a plan that you have to inform your constituency and let them know this is truly what's happening, this is why I did what I did, and so on?
Yeah, I really do, actually. I've looked at a couple other people that I have appreciated the things they're doing, and right now it's using social media. It is so easy to jump on and create a quick little video to be able to explain either a bill coming up, being able to testify, what you can do. And so I'm really hoping to utilize those platforms so that information can get out quickly, especially in session, because it goes so fast. I mean, in one day, you can see so many different bills and have the opportunity to testify. But as a constituent who's working, raising a family, all of that is really hard to maneuver. And so I want to be able to try to present that like, hey, this is coming up today. You can probably show up about this time. So communication. I'm really hoping to utilize social media and communicate as effectively as I can. Yeah.
And I just think it's a really big issue where people there's so much information and they want to get to the meat. They just need the information. They need it in a way that's palatable. I don't think that it's realistic that people are really going to sit down and read a bill because they're often packed full of things that aren't even relevant to the bill, which we need to fix that issue also. But that people need the truth. They need it concisely. And I agree with you. I think video is actually the best way to do it because we are sitting here having this conversation. If we were to type up this interview and put it in a magazine or in an email, it would take probably half an hour to read. And you would get half of the substance that we're providing. So video is very good in that you can provide so much more in such a short period of time. Right. 3-4 minutes gives you way more capacity than an email. Now, you could say, well, you can write as many words as you want in an email, but people will disengage because it takes longer to digest and it takes longer to get through. So I think that is great. And I think that you ought to do this. And I think someone who does do this well, people aren't going to like me for this, is AOC. AOC utilizes social media and she uses it in a way that has been very effective, whether you like her or not, which I don't. But whether you like her or not, you have to look at that and say, okay, that is working for her. And we ought to look at that and say, we need to start doing this. And she'll do it right out of a legislative session. She'll come out and be like, this is what they're doing. And you guys need to start, Well,
I got a new one for you. Congresswoman Kat Kamik. She is doing that as well.
Okay.
And she's a Republican.
Awesome.
And so, but yes, I hear what you're saying. And she's actually one when they did the Build Back Better bill that was like 2,000 pages. Between her and her team, they took it into little chunks, and she would video and say, here's the main points, and then call your congresswoman or congressman. And so she made it very easy in, 10, 15 minutes, a 2,000 page document, which is a lot easier for somebody like me to digest.
Right. And and it's more engaging too. You get to really see the substance of it and the passion behind it. There was another congressman also on that is a Republican that is doing the same thing. I happened upon his YouTube channel by accident the other day and started looking at his videos. I was like, man, that's what we need.
Yeah.
That's how we get the information right there, because people they'll listen to it while driving. They'll listen to it while running. They'll listen to it while working out. So there's just a lot more reach. You can't drive and read an article. You can't drive and you can't work out at the gym and read an article. It doesn't work.
Yep.
I think it would be great if you or when you get elected.
That's my goal.
That you utilize that platform, and
I really want to, because I want more voices. I want to represent the people, and in order to do that, they have to hear, and I have to hear from them. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. So let's move on to, and this is the issue of the hour, I suppose. Let's move on to question 4 on the survey, which is life. And our statement is, God created man in his image. The duty of civil government is the protection of innocent human life from conception until natural death. The issue application is that Washington State's reproductive privacy rights law allows minors to obtain abortions without parental consent. Additionally, this law requires taxpayer-funded abortions on demand. Late-term abortions are legal throughout all 9 months of pregnancy in Washington because of the vague way that viability is defined in this law. The response is that the reproductive privacy rights law needs to be challenged and or repealed at both the state and local levels. And you responded to 10, strongly agree. And so with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we truly do have power now back in the state, because the state can't just point to Roe v. Wade and say, hey, there's nothing you can do. We have legal precedent that abortion is legal. We do have these laws in the books that allow abortion essentially until day of birth. And so really, we now do have the power to go and say, this is not okay. We need to repeal, replace, amend, whatever we need to do. We need to get this fixed, and so that we can put life first. And so what's your position? What are you seeing? What is the overall response to the overturning of Roe v. Wade that you've seen when you're out doorbelling and so on?
Well, number one is people don't truly understand what overturning of Roe versus Wade is. And so I always have to make the statement that it upheld the Constitution and gave the rights back to the states. So just so we're all clear that that is what the actual determination was. It wasn't doing anything to abortion. Okay. It was allowing the states to then make a decision with their representatives and the people's voice. So back to the state. So now we're at Washington State, and Washington State on the books allows up to 24 weeks, which is also, I agree with you, vague. And so there is that vague language that could potentially be an abortion all the way through pregnancy.
And so I know this is going to be really difficult, and it's going to take seats. We need people who are principled, biblically principled, that stand behind God's morality and his moral law, to go to Olympia and say, guys, we're not doing this anymore. Like, this isn't okay. We are literally murdering babies, and for convenience, for the worst.
About 97% is typically not based on rape or incest. So 97% of abortions are, I guess, a choice.
Right. And it's, because I'm having a hard time, or I don't think I'll be able to cope, and so on. But there's two parts to this, I think. One is the church have failed. The church have failed the community. The church have failed in reaching these mothers or expectant mothers to say, hey, we'll raise you up, we'll prop you up. We'll say, and we need to get behind those people. And because you have two opportunities, this is how I see it. You have two opportunities if you're a church. You go out to someone who is possibly a non-believer or maybe believes but isn't really invested in their faith. And you have an opportunity to save them and their child. Right. So you're not just saving one soul, you're saving two. And I think that the cost benefit is irrelevant, but it's low. And so it doesn't cost a lot of money to provide diapers, to provide wipes, to provide clothing. Most clothing you can buy at Salvation Army, you can get donations and so on.
There's a lot of services.
There's a lot of services we could be providing. So I think that's one. We have a failing of the church, which to me is also why culturally this is now acceptable.
To add to that, I have to tell you the statistic I just heard was 83% of women who have had an abortion would not have had that abortion if just one person came alongside them. Wow. Not even necessarily the father, just a person. So I do see that in the comment about the church. If we can come alongside, which I do think that services need to be available, and that a lot of times is people walking beside that new mother.
Yeah, and I mean, the church can really fulfill that role. You know, most churches have daycares or at least the facilities to do daycare. And we could the church could expand exponentially, and not even from a monetarily standpoint, but from a congregational standpoint, where you have true believers and that realize they need the church there and that want to prop up the people in the church and those expectant mothers. And I do believe that Christians, if there was a direct path where we could say, hey, if you give $100 a month to the church into this fund, we will go out and we will end abortion in our community. And let me give you an example. There is a church, Apologia Church, Pastor Jeff Durbin, and I think it's Tempe, Arizona. They're a Baptist church, and Jeff Durbin and his church have single-handedly closed several Planned Parenthoods, and they don't do it in the name of hate. They don't condemn people. What they do is they do picket, and they say, you don't have to do this. We have people that will adopt your child. We'll pay for the whole thing. And hey, if you have your child and you want your child, we'll provide all the diapers, all the wipes, clothing, whatever you need.
Just coming alongside.
We'll just come alongside them and just saying, we will give you everything you need to be a parent so that we can alleviate that burden so you can love your child.
Right.
This isn't your only option. And they've seen tremendous success.
And I love how you said that, so that you can love your child, because the love is the easy part. It's all the other stuff. How can I take care of this baby? How am I going to do this alone is usually a lot of the comment.
Yeah. And they're resolute. They've gone to jail for this. They've gone to jail, illegally gone to jail, where someone's just said, I don't like what they're saying. And the cops come and they say, oh, you have a megaphone, you're not allowed. And they know the code. They do everything legally, and they'll still get taken away for public disturbance, even though they're well within their rights. And so, but they're willing. They're willing to go to jail to stand. And it is, yes, to save that child's life, but it's also to stand behind God's law.
But it also saves mothers too. And I think sometimes we forget about fathers. There's often a father in this picture, and as outside of rape and incest, the father may want to have something to do with this, and they're not even brought into the equation. They're not even thought about. They have no choice. Yep. And I struggle with that one as well. I feel like we've also, as a society, not allowed fathers to think that they can and should be a part of that decision.
Right. And often systemically, the woman has all the power in terms of whether they choose to have an abortion, not to have an abortion. And then if they choose not to have the abortion, but the father doesn't want the child, the father still imposed child support, regardless of whether he wanted the child or not. Now, that to me is a direct contradiction to your choice, because it's not your choice. You're imposing your choice on someone else. And so you're doing the people who claim to be my body, my choice, for example, but it's your body, your choice that you then impose on other people. But if we do the same to you, you don't like them.
And to add to the choice, often this conversation around choice is you have a choice to an abortion. What if we change that conversation to you have a choice to keep your baby? You have a choice to keep life. I just feel like that's not part of the choice conversation. Right. And that really bothers me, because the choice is only around abortion. Well, how about the choice around that baby?
Yeah. But again, it comes down to resources and mental health resources, monetarily resources. But we as a church body and we as a community need to stand up and say, hey, we will help you. We will give you the things that you need. And not just even diapers, wipes, and clothing, but support.
Yeah.
You know, if you need a break, we'll watch your child. You know, we have that support group of, let's say, nannies or whatever it may be, that can say, yeah, I can take for 2 days. I can take your kids, so you guys can go and spend some time together.
I just want it to focus more on like life affirming versus all the reasons of, well, I'm doing this because of poverty. Well, is poverty a reason to kill a life? I just want the conversation to be bigger, and that's what I really hope for.
Yeah, and it is a changing of mentality, and we have a cultural battle on our hands to let women know that you're not alone, and this isn't, and it's dangerous for them too. They might not realize it in the moment, but you know, whether it be a year, or 2 years, 6 months, whatever it may be, there will come a time where there will be a moment of reflection, where maybe they're 5 years down the road, they're in a relationship with someone new and they're getting married, and then they're having a child. And then
Or
they have that.
Or can't have one.
Or can't have one. And then they have this moment of reflection, and they say, or they have this child, and then they have this moment of reflection and say, man, I did something wrong. Like, that was bad. And then, so it might not be immediate, but at some point there is a point of shame, guilt, regret.
Absolutely.
That almost unanimously every woman who has had an abortion feels. And we don't talk about that. We don't tell them like, hey, this
we
might
don't talk
have
about the trauma.
Right. This might have an impact on you later.
Right.
And I think that we blindside women. We use terms like fetus, which is just Latin for baby, and to try and disconnect them from the reality. You know, we confuse them with verbiage and, it's not a child, it's just tissue. And
Which is ridiculous at this point in time, because we know so much about the science behind a baby. We know exactly when that heartbeat starts. We know everything now.
Right.
So to just say it's tissue.
Right. And so what is your position on this? If you were to go to the legislature and you were to say, we need to fix this. This doesn't work. What's your position? How would you legislate abortion essentially in the state of Washington?
Well, you know, originally abortion was supposed to be safe, legal, and rare. That word rare.
Thank you,
we
Bill
got
Clinton.
very far away from that word rare. And, you know, I'm not going to be an expert on certain situations that, you know, some things can be between a doctor and that person. But, you know, and specifically rape and incest, I've never been in that position. And I'm doing a lot of prayer and reflection on that at the moment. I do think it's a trauma compounding a trauma, because both of those are traumatic. Meaning the rape or the incest in addition to abortion, because I have not met a person yet that has not had some sort of trauma around abortion. So I guess I just see that trauma compounding trauma, and I don't have the answers to that other than I just can't imagine not accepting that life. You know, I had kind of an oopsie pregnancy. Our third one 16 years later, and it was very emotional, but not 1 second of that did I question whether I was going to have that baby.
Right.
And I just know she's out of the greatest blessing I didn't know I needed. And so, yes, I see babies as blessings, and sometimes they're blessings to somebody else, you know, through adoption. And there are so many families that want babies. So it's a complicated conversation, but it has to be a conversation. And allowing our current law is a travesty. I can't get behind that in any way. And I definitely want to change that. It is not affirming life. It is not biblically sound, and it is very sad.
And again, it's a tough issue because, you know, unless you've been a victim of rape, unless you've been a victim of incest, whether you're a man or a woman, you don't know what that person is going through, and you will never know. Right. And I even say that, you know, there's varying degrees of rape. There's and not that they're not all abhorrent, but some are more violent than others. And I would even say that even two rape victims might not even understand each other, because one may have been violently, you know, beaten and raped, and the other may have been raped and it wasn't as violent. So they understand from the physical standpoint, but it varying degrees. So
Right.
it's really hard to say how any of us could even get in the mind of each other to say this is how it feels, because it's different for everyone.
But we shouldn't base a law off of that 1 to 3%.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And but that begs the question, right? Because it's like you said, it's such a hard issue that we don't know, and we can only sit with those people and say, okay, how are you feeling? But then I sit and I think, well, this person was raped. They're dealing with the trauma of that. 2 months later, they find out they're pregnant. Now they're faced with picking another trauma,
Another traumatic.
abortion, or carrying this child to full term. And we just don't know how that impacts them. I just don't think we'll ever know. So,
But if we were focused on life affirming options, I just think the conversation would be different.
yes. And Paul Brian Noble, I had an interview with him, and he said something to me that and it wasn't even a new argument, but it's just the way that he said it. He said, that person in that moment, if they have gone through that trauma and then they find out they're pregnant, we as a community need to come behind them, and we need to tell them, no, you should have this child, and you can have this child and give it up to abortion. And he said, because that
Adoption.
gives sorry,
It's okay.
adoption. I apologize. Give that child up for adoption. There are people willing to adopt,
Yes.
and not only that, but he said something to me, and it just made me really think. He said, in that moment, when that woman is at her lowest and she now finds out she's pregnant, it gives her the opportunity for her to be the most Christ-like she will ever be in her life.
It also gives her control, that she lost in that traumatic event of rape, because you have no control in that. And giving that control of an option, I love that.
Yeah,
So,
and it was just really, I've heard it before, but it's just the way that he said it was just, I was like, man, you're right.
it's like empowering. That's
Yeah.
a better word than control, that empowering. Like I can be Christ-like, and I can be empowered to either keep this baby and or give it up for adoption, but give life.
But they need that community behind them.
Absolutely.
And they need that, like you said, they need that affirmation that there are services available to help them through these things. And lowering the cost of adoption has to be one of the priorities. I mean, it's disgusting that people are going overseas to adopt overseas that kind of have children, because the process is so convoluted and so expensive here that they just go, well, this doesn't make sense for us. And a federal tax break doesn't cut it.
Right.
The cost out the door has to be the priority. It has to be, this is inexpensive, it's cheap, we can do this, and the community can get behind them.
Which will save more children.
It will save more lives. And that brings me to my next point on this issue is there is a gentleman named Peter Rex. He's the CEO of Rex. I think it's just called Rex, actually.
Okay.
And they are I think they're a software company or something along those lines. He has offered $7,500 to every one of his employees that are pregnant, so if you're a man and your wife's pregnant and you guys are considering an abortion, he's saying, don't have an abortion, give your child up to adoption. And we know it's expensive, so we're going to give you $7,500 towards the adoption process. And so, we need more companies. We need more people that have that believe in life, that are willing to speak with their money and say, hey, there are other options. We know they're expensive, but here we go. We can help you. We're here. And realistically speaking, I feel like just even knowing that option is there has you reevaluate whether or not you ought to have an abortion, or whether
And
it's
that's what I mean by the life affirming conversation. Start having these conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that we ought to do that. So there's a lot going on. How do you foresee the state of the legislature right now? What do you see going on there that you feel like you can truly have impact on?
I definitely think we can have a big impact just on crime and public safety. I know that we can make some very serious change and affect all of us, because we all want to be safe in our neighborhoods and our homes and not be dealing with people stealing things or property crimes. So I definitely feel like that's number one. And then Second one is education. We have to really start thinking about the education system, and our kids are failing. The test scores are showing that. So again, what we're doing is not working. So why are we doing the same thing and spending over $18,000 per student in public education? So we have to make some changes in our system.
Yeah. I agree.
And it's not the teachers. I think teachers, I've said this so many times, are the glue holding education together. But we definitely need to do some serious policy change in education.
Yeah, and keep our kids safe too, because the kids don't feel safe at school. They don't feel safe at home. Sometimes in school, sometimes it's that getaway, and now it's policy and all these procedural things are just really bogging down the system. And we need to, in my opinion, we need a complete overhaul. We need to really look at it and get back to the basics. Get away from ideologies in the public school system.
Agreed.
It needs to be grounded in facts, history, and science. And if we can focus on those three things, and when I say facts, I don't mean made up things. I mean actual things that are provable forensically, that we know our truths.
I would agree with you.
And so I wish you the best of luck. I hope
you.
that if you are elected, I hope that you are able to go in and rustle some feathers and really make some change, because we need it. The state needs it. Our county needs it. And thank you for running, because I know it's difficult.
Yeah.
Can you let people know where to find you
Yes.
and how to get in contact with you if they have any questions?
So friendsofnatalie.com is the website. And if you can get onto Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, we're on quite a few different platforms. It's Friends of Natalie, except for I think Twitter is Natalie J. Poulson, because Friends of Natalie was taken. But Friends of Natalie is the way to get a hold of us.
Okay, so friendsofnatalie.com?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.